change of pace. And so really what we want to make sure that people understand is what our allocation mechanisms are, what they look like, and where you might fit, and give you an opportunity to sort of look at that and ask questions. So there's plenty of time after this, after I talk, to ask questions, but of course you can ask at any point in the workshop, either on Slack or verbally. I'm not going to go over hardware or anything specific. It's really going to be focused on the allocation programs. And I think the only real important starting point is to remind everyone that we are a national user facility. And what that means is that we are focused on open science. So our primary methods of allocation are open to anyone to apply, and you'll see this reflected in our allocation programs. So the three primary categories are Insight, which is our flagship program, ALCC, which is Oscar Leadership Computing Challenge. Oscar is our sponsor in the Office of Science in the DOE, and the Director's Discretionary Programs. And they have different but overlapping purposes. Insight and ALCC are production allocation programs, and DD has a lot of different things that it'll serve, and I'll walk through a few of those. The breakdown is, for the most part, 60% going to Insight, 30% going to the ALCC program, and 10% going to Director's Discretionary. That 30% going to ALCC, though, also incorporates time that is focused on the exascale computing program. So that actually takes a third of that 20%, of that third of that 30%. And this is kind of like this art chart slide that I have been evolving for years. I use this mostly, you have the slides, it can be a quick reference to kind of get a sense of the differences between the programs. The key thing here is to know that the general size of awards with the Insight tends to be the largest. ALCC tends to be similarly large awards, but often not quite as high, with slightly different priorities in terms of how they assess the proposals. And then Director's Discretionary are much smaller, shorter allocations focused on for the most part, readiness. Okay, so I'm going to walk up actually from DD to ALCC and then to Insight. And as I mentioned, primarily the Director's Discretionary pool is used for like first step projects, right? So if you're exploring how to get started at the ALCF, you're exploring developing a proposal for Insight or ALCC, or you're collaborating with in some regards, we use the DD. This is really low overhead. You just have to go to our website, you fill out a few paragraphs with an estimate of what time you might need. And the turnaround there is really meant to be like 2 weeks before you're able to get on the system. And I apologize, I'm just realizing there is a typo here for historical reasons. It is 10% of the system that we focus on for DD. They tend to be shorter in life, but completely renewable. So you might be awarded 3 months or 6 months, but the premise is we need something to have you come back to us and talk to us about progress and anything that might be going on. And so the point is to have a touch point at that 3 to 6 months, and we can readily renew projects that are making progress to their goals. We also use the discretionary pool for strategic programs. And some of these are, for example, our data science program, which started several years ago. It was really focused on engaging data-driven projects and offering them collaborative expertise with us at the ALCF so that we could help them overcome any technical barriers they might have in using a large scale facility. So at that point, there was several years ago, a lot of demand, but a lot of technical barriers that were still in place. And so for us as a facility, it was beneficial to have that collaboration so we could evolve as a facility and better suit the needs for more data-driven projects. But we also wanted to sort of offer that carrot in collaborating with us of helping them overcome some of those technical burdens. You can look for this to be transforming over the course of the next year as we're looking more at AI for science and engaging with those projects. But this was a relatively small program because, as I said, it does run out of discretionary. It's not many projects. It was, on the order of like maybe 2 projects per year. And it was a very collaborative kind of getting started, but with a little bit of a boost compared to like regular getting started. The other program we ran out of the Director's Discretionary specifically is our early science program. And so this doesn't have a regular call. It's really driven by when we are preparing for a new machine. And so this is our method of collaborating with a pool of researchers to make sure that their applications are ready to go on a new system like Aurora as soon as possible. They help us test that system and really run the software and the hardware as hard as we can before it goes into full production. So that's not a regular call. That's something that happens as we move into the new acquisition process. It's really driven by that cycle. Right. So moving quickly into new awards, major awards, we've got the Insight and ALCC, which are sort of our real production award programs. As I mentioned, the ALCC program is run by our sponsors at Oscar. 20% is really devoted to this program, the ALCC program. Then at this, as I mentioned, another 10% of the system is focused for ECP support. This program is different from Insight because it is mission driven. It is looking for projects that align with Department of Energy priorities. They do not need to necessarily be DOE funded always, but they need to align with DOE priorities. And this can also be things like national emergencies. So for example, a lot of COVID-19 research was folded into the ALCC program in a very off-cycle method. This call is once a year. You'll see it open in the fall. You will be required to write a letter of intent before you're able to submit a full proposal at the new year. So somewhere around the November timeframe, there'll be a call for letters of intent. Those will be due before the end of the year. And then early in the year, you will be invited to submit a full proposal. The awards are only for a year. And they tend to be, as I said, like on Theta, approximately 1 million node hours, but there's a huge dynamic range in this. There is slightly less computational readiness, which I will define, but I mean, in terms of readiness to use the system, there's slightly less of a requirement with ALCC. So we see awards that are quite small to quite large, right? Very, very Insight scale level of awards. And so I'm going to define a few things that I've already used, which is really annoying, but I've already used them. But I'll walk through Insight now, and especially because that call is currently open. Pardon me, I click. The deadline for new proposals for 2023 is June 17th. So that's coming up remarkably quickly. And if you happen to already be an Insight project, you will have you will have a renewal, and you should have been informed about this, but you have a renewal coming. Those are due about a month later. Insight is our flagship, right? So as the flagship, it really serves that user facility function. And what that means is that we are targeting the high impact open science from any field, with PIs from anywhere in the world, but really looking for those projects that have the most likely high impact in their areas, but that also cannot be run elsewhere. So that you need some large computing facility in order to actually accomplish them. It's actually coupled with part of the ALCF and ALCF mission, which is that really we're trying to give awards that would be very difficult to get at other compute facilities. There's a twofold review process, which I'll just pick apart very, very quickly. They tend to be the largest awards that you will see at the facilities, and you can request 1 to 3 years. So you can do 1, 2, or 3 year proposals. Those 2 or 3 year proposals go through a renewal, but it's a pretty straightforward process. And I'm going to pick apart, give you a few details as we go in, but I also want to point out that there is a webinar on June 3rd. So if you are new to writing an Insight proposal, or if you are just looking for some more input and get some questions answered about writing an Insight proposal, there's a webinar. We go through in detail how to write that proposal and what the different parts are and what we're looking for, and try to help you as much as possible. But this kind of give you a very quick overview of some of the things that we will be covering, but very, very high level, like a 2-second version. The resources in the 2023 call at OLCF are Summit and Frontier, and in the and for ALCF, we have Theta, Polaris, and to a degree, Aurora in the call. So in terms of giving time in 2023, we're unlikely to give large allocations on Aurora, but we are asking people to express interest if near the end of 2023, they want to get on Aurora, they have part of their campaign that they want to start moving there, we will make that time available, assuming everything goes smoothly. But beyond that, the rest of the systems should be available entirely for allocation in 2023. And Theta and Summit will only be available for 1-year allocations. So they are only available for 2023. We're not making them available for 24 and 25 requests. Right. As I mentioned, there's a really, it's a broad criteria for being able to submit a proposal for Insight. Really, primarily, we are looking for research campaigns with a high impact. And that can be defined in many ways. We don't really have a strict definition of impact. It can be that you're finding the answer to a scientific question, right? That is really important and exciting, but it could also be that you're generating a data set that people really need. It can be a very large number of different things. So it's really quite variable from domain to domain, and that is common. So that's the primary one, looking for something that could have a high impact. The second criteria is that you need something specific out of the LCFs in order to run. And so really we're looking for something computationally or data intensive, architecturally challenging, or specifically interested in an architectural feature of the LCFs, but something that you cannot do elsewhere. And beyond that, for eligibility, it's wide open. The only thing we really run into in terms of restrictions are whether you are in countries that are officially listed as state sponsors of terrorism. Otherwise, anyone can apply. It does not matter where your funding comes from. It does not matter where you are housed as a PI, international or national is fine. There's a twofold review process. By far, the most important part of that review process is the merit review. This is done by science panels. The panels are made up of, depending on the number of proposals, approximately a dozen experts from the field that is being reviewed. And they're really reading for the science and or technical merit of the proposal, but they're also looking to make sure that the approach makes sense, that the right team's in place, that the amount of time that's being requested is also commensurate with the type of problem that they're trying to tackle. The second part of the review is done by the facilities themselves. So it is done by the science and technical teams at the ALCF and OLCF. And here we are making sure that the projects are technically ready, that they've done, sort of the calculations correctly for how much time that they will need, that they are running, or they know how they will run, they know how to interact with the resource. And that is very important. It is not the deciding, it's not like the primary deciding factor. We look first at those highly rated merit proposals, but the computational readiness is important for us to be able to assess risk, for us to be able to understand how quickly a project is going to be able to get up and go, and whether they have a chance, right, of being successful within the time constraint of their proposal. As I mentioned, insights are multiple year, so there is a renewal that some proposals go through. And it is a different type of review. Primarily for a renewal proposal, we are just making sure that that proposal is staying on scope. So the scope was defined in that original proposal, and we're looking to understand, has it stayed consistent with what the original proposal proposed? If it is not, why did it change? If it did change, is that consistent with the line of inquiry it was originally following, or perhaps is this substantively different that it needs to go back and recompete as a new proposal? If you are a renewal proposal and you have any questions, about whether that would count as something, I should recompete or not, just feel free to reach out. Those are normally pretty straightforward for us to assess and give guidance on in deciding what path to take. And I just wanted to give you some statistics. Of course, the number of resources is going to expand pretty substantially for 2023 and 2024, but this just gives you a sense of the size and the number of projects that we see come through Insight. So that generally, we're not talking about a huge number of projects. And one other thing to keep in mind too is even as a system sort of ages, the total number of projects kind of falls a little bit. Theta has generally a history of a fewer number of projects because it is a smaller resource. Polaris has a particularly small number of projects for 2022 only because at the point last year where we were doing this, it was still a mystery machine, we weren't able to reveal a lot of information, and we weren't sure how much time would actually be available. So that's slightly, it's under allocated for this year in terms of, if it had been available the entire allocation year. But for the most part, what you're thinking about on Theta is approximately 1 million node hours or more. We certainly have awarded larger projects. And for Summit, around 500,000 node hours. They suspect going into Frontier that it'll sort of be actually sort of similar in terms of node hours. It'll just be much more powerful nodes. And 3 things I wanted to point out, trends and changes within Insight. This one is kind of been a repeating trend, but it's always valuable to repeat it every year. Every year, we see a significant increase in the number of proposals that have a large data component or a learning component. We see this continuing to escalate. We are evolving our review process in order to accommodate this and make sure that proposals are read effectively and can get a quality peer review. One of the other things that was new last year in 2021 for the 2022 year was that we started an early career track. And this was incredibly successful. The idea was we really wanted to support projects PIs within the first 10 years of getting their PhD. And so we committed a certain amount of research, up to 10% of the Insight time will be awarded to early career proposals. And frankly, I will say that the quality of early career proposals that came in was absolutely fantastic, incredibly high, and was very exciting. And we will continue that for 2023. Finally, completely new this year is that projects will be able to express interest in using the AI testbed at the ALCF or the quantum testbed at the OLCF. So these are R&D systems. They are not production systems, and they do not have a lot of time associated with them, but they have a lot of very interesting hardware associated with them. And there's more details for this online. But the premise is that if you have, as a project, feel like using either one of these test beds would actually be supportive of your project, or there's a related component of your project that you'd like to test on these systems, the proposal process allows you some space that doesn't take away from the bulk of your proposal in order to express that interest and give us a sense of perhaps how much time you were interested in. It's not a guarantee, but it's a sort of a nice, easy way to sort of express that interest and potentially gain access to some really cool hardware at both of these testbed sites. So as I mentioned, Insight is coming in fast with a June 17th deadline. And to repeat that, we have the June 3rd webinar coming up. ALCC will be coming for, and I actually did not mention this, but it's a 6 months off. So the Insight year starts January 1st. The ALCC year starts July 1st. And so this fall of 2022, the call will go out for those projects that might start on July 1st of 2023. So we just got the 2022-2023 projects from Oscar just in the past 24 hours. So keep your eye open this fall for that. And a reminder that the discretionary projects are ongoing. So at any point in the year, you can submit a request for that. They tend to be smaller. They're really meant to be exploratory and to sort of set up this sort of success for a new proposal. And as I also alluded to, right, we use these for other projects like the data science program, and a new version of that will be coming out in the course of the next several months. So I also encourage you to keep your eyes open there. All right, that was all I had. I just kind of wanted to give that quick run through those to tickle any thoughts you might have in the back of your mind, or to give you some things to sort of percolate on for the next few, several hours of the workshop, and so you could ask questions if you wanted to.